if you look at family group conferences or Eigen Kracht-conferenties, the way they are accepted not only by the families, but also by the institutions, by the professionals. Can you, based on your experience, tell us a little bit on how to successfully implement family group conferencing and how to overcome primal fears that amateurs will spoil good care instead of help providing the right care?
Okay, it's a good question. I think family group conferences present everyone with a challenge. While many families will just get on and sort their own problems out in their own way in the community, what we're really focusing on here today is families who are facing significant difficulties or challenges or problems, and how they can be helped and supported to resolve them. I think one of the very powerful things about family group conferences is that it works on the basic principle of giving people the opportunity to take control of their own lives. And I think most people understand that. They understand the notion of self-governance, about making decisions about their own lives, and they welcome it. The other thing that's ubiquitous about family group conferences is about family. Whenever you talk to people about what's important to them, they will always tell you family. In fact, if you look at the European research into what's important to Europeans, the top of the list is family. It's above health, in fact it's above everything else. And when we ask people in trainings all over the world, what would you do if you couldn't look after your own children? Who would you want to look after your own children? Everyone says their family or their friends. But some of the families we come into contact with lack confidence and they lack self-belief. And I was just thinking about a study that was done in the 70s by Seligman, where he looked at what happened in institutions. He described this phenomenon called learned helplessness, where people constantly had things done for them or done to them and never had the opportunity to take control themselves, and they became helpless. They learned to be helpless. And that can't be good for people. So I think there are challenges with some families who face significant problems. There are also challenges in engaging professional organisations in this work as well, because understandably social workers, their managers, organisational leaders will be worried about things going wrong. What happens if things go wrong? Who will take the blame? What will happen to the organisation? What will happen to me if a child dies or something bad happens from doing this conference? Well, the truth is, if you look at the research, the evidence is clear that family group conferences are a very safe way of making decisions about children. The weight of evidence suggests very strongly this is safer than a lot of the orthodox ways of making decisions. But we're nervous about it because it's new to us, it's different to us. And perhaps more fundamentally it involves a shift in our thinking and the way we work and the way we look at families and the strengths in families. So I think one of the challenges for us is if we work in systems and organisations where we're expected to know what is best for other people, we're expected to be the experts on other people, we can get caught in that position. That problem becomes amplified or enhanced where or when the people we are working with are categorised, usually by us, as dysfunctional, damaged, multi-problem, dangerous. If we use those labels, it encourages into a particular role of being in control and trying to take control of other people's problems. Wouldn't it be great if we could rethink some of the language here, multi-problem family? If we just recast that for a moment, multi-resource family. We started to think about the resources in families and how do we tap into the resources in families and work with those resources.
Thank you. There's a convincing argument. However, I tend to be a little bit pessimistic about reframing in terms of language. We had a big discussion in Holland where we had problem neighborhoods reframed as opportunity neighborhoods. That really didn't work for a very long time. Actually, this morning I had a discussion with some of the board members of some of the bigger agencies, and one of the arguments that was used against FGC was that they cater to people without a network, without a family that can be organized as a group. That must sound familiar to you. How do you convince people that there's almost always a way to organize a powerful network?
Okay, I'm going to tell you a little story about reframing before I answer your question about networks. I'm a social worker. I've been a social worker for 20 years now, always in child protection. And my wife's a social worker as well. So, 2 social workers in the house, and so it's a problem. And we have 3 children. And the eldest once said to my partner, "Mummy, what does Daddy do at work?" So my wife thought about this for a moment. She said, "Well, he tries to help mummies and daddies who are having problems looking after children." So Carrie said, "Do you mean like you, Mum?" And so I'm not advocating a sort of wildly optimistic reframing of everything we do, but maybe a bit more precision in what we're describing. I mean, sometimes you hear the language abusive parents. It's actually quite rare to find abusive parents. You usually find one abusive parent and another parent who's somehow caught up in that position. So we just need a bit more precision, and I'm a bit worried that the term multi-problem family lacks the precision we need to deal with what's in front of us. But leaving that aside, your question is fundamentally about what about families who have really fractured networks, or the networks aren't there? We've never found a family that doesn't have some type of network. There may be no family of blood who are willing or able to get connected, but there's usually some friend or someone in that social network who has an interest in that child or young person. Well, I think one of the powerful things about this approach is it's about children. And people recognize that. So when you start your work and the focus is on children and say, this meeting is for the kids, it helps to provide some mandate and momentum. Now maybe you have a conference which only one person comes to. But at the very least you're giving the family or that person or that group an opportunity to make a decision and to exercise their rights as citizens to make some of their own choices. If that doesn't work, if they can't come up with a plan, if the plan fails, at least we can be confident as public servants that we've done our best to involve people in decisions that affect their lives, particularly at those points in their lives when their choices or their liberties are most at risk. So I would argue that we shouldn't be applying to the court for an order, except for an emergency order, until we've had a family group conference. If we look at the evidence, is that in most cases, more than 9 out of 10, 95%, plans and decisions are made. And they're supported. So we should be encouraged by that.
Absolutely. If you use this in a setting like this, society as a whole can benefit more from that way of approaching. And I understand that that is part of this new act in New Zealand. You're about to help implement it and be responsible for it. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
What happened in New Zealand was they had way too many children in custody, way too many children in institutions, in residential care, in institutional settings, and particularly Maori children in those settings. So the government, a new government came in and decided to undertake a piece of consultation. And rather than doing the sort of usual paper exercise where they send papers out to people and publish stuff and say, what do you think, hoping that no one will give an answer so they can get on and implement, they went out and they met the Māori people in particular on the marae, which is a community meeting place, a spiritual meeting place, and they listened. They listened to what people had to say about what was happening. And what they described was a litany of sound, of passion about what was going wrong. What people from those communities were saying was, give us more control over decisions that affect our children and our community, our families. Give us more control, and what will happen is we will make decisions that suit our culture and our community and our family. And that's what they did. They put that idea into law. There were some compromises, because the government wanted to retain the right and the authority, and understand why, to make sure children were always safe. And that's an important public commitment, an important public requirement. So the compromise was the joining of skills of family and community and professional state agencies, the joining of those skills into a family group conference to make safe decisions for children and good decisions for children. The difference in the legislation was that while pre-legislation decisions were made by gathering of professionals, proposed legislation, families were the frontline decision makers for children. So that was a shift that occurred. My job is just to try and make sure that they're keeping in track with the legislation, they're doing the things that the legislation promised that they would do.
Do you have any idea why New Zealand is so far the only country with legislation like that? Or in other words, how long should we wait until we implement this in other countries?
It's not the only country in the world. There's legislation in Ireland, there's legislation in Canada, and there's some legislation occurring, I think, in South Africa as well. But primarily, most of the delivery of FGCs is not based under legislation. I think you're asking a very important question here, is should we take the step to change things legally? I think that framing this work in the context of rights and democracy is the right place to put it, and that's why I've been so impressed really by what's happened here in the Netherlands, because people are quite political here, more political in the UK. We're all sort of couch potatoes in the UK. Don't put that on the film, by the way. There's more interest, there seems to be more political interest here, and I've been very interested to see how people have framed some of this stuff in the context of people's rights and as citizens rather than just a social work methodology.
Thank you so much. I think, ladies and gentlemen, we had some very interesting thoughts by Paul Nixon. Let's give him a warm applause and learn from him.